Hi, I'm Kirsten. I'm an eternal optimist and a dreamer. I believe that I can change the world with my own two hands, and I am not afraid to try. But of all of the roles and titles that I've had throughout my life, by far the most important one is auntie. Oh, they're cute, right? So I have 4 amazing nieces and 1 fantastic little nephew, and these kids have entirely changed my life. My oldest niece is going to be 15 this summer, and I have no idea how that happened. She's grown up so quickly, but I remember holding her in my arms like it was yesterday, and I remember thinking to myself, I want her to have all of the choices in life. I wanted her to be able to crack her heart wide open and to run full force toward life, to say yes to the things she wanted to say yes to say no to the things that didn't serve her highest good, to grab life fully with both hands and to own it. But I also knew that for kids, seeing is believing, and that the most important people in any child's life are the role models that immediately surround them. So that meant that if I wanted her to have all of the choices in life, I first needed to give them to myself. So with that epiphany, all these different dark emotions started crawling up from the corners and shadows of my soul, and it brought with it all of these really bad questions. Questions like, am I good enough to have all of these choices? Am I smart enough to have all of these choices? And even really damaging questions like, am I pretty enough to have all of these choices? And I realized that the main question I was asking myself was, do I deserve to take up the space that comes with having all of these choices? I didn't have an answer, but I knew that I couldn't take all of that emotion and shove it back down into the shadows, and so instead, I put it to work. I started doing PR for Fortune 500 organizations, focusing on diversity and inclusion, sustainability, philanthropy, that kind of stuff. For a girl who wanted to change the world, it was a perfect fit. Now, I know that PR can sometimes get a bad rap, but for me, it was wonderful because it helped me to learn and understand what goes into people making different kinds of choices. It also really helped me to dig into how to make big change happen in this world. It was doing this work that I understood kind of one big lesson. And it was that meaningful action is driven by emotional connection. So you can build the best business case known to mankind, you can chuck all different kinds of data in it, but if you aren't able to emotionally connect to people, you're never going to get very far. So what does that actually end up looking like? If emotion is super important, right? Is there something else bigger going on here? So I did what any other normal person would do, and I started to Google it. Turns out that science actually backs up the fact that emotion is super important. Studies suggest that 75 to 90% of all of our success is driven entirely by emotion. Now, this is crazy to me because there's all of these industries that are built up telling us how to succeed, when the reality is that we've had those keys to ourselves all along. Now, if this is something important, there must be something bigger happening here, so it has to tie back to something, right? So again, with the Googling, I figured out that actually mental health is integral for emotional well-being. And here's the definition of it there, folks. You can read it. It's a person's condition regarding their psychological and emotional well-being. I personally found this definition entirely freeing. We have so much stigma packed into the concept of mental health in this country. We're almost afraid to even talk about it, even with our closest friends. And so I understand that mental health is typically relegated to the concept of mental illness, things like paranoid schizophrenia or clinical depression or even OCD. And don't get me wrong, all of those things are super important, but mental illness is just one piece of the much bigger mental health pie. And if we want to actually bring meaningful success into our lives, we're going to need to start to tackle it. So if it's so important then that we have all of this mental health in our lives, the truth is then that it belongs to all of us. This is all of our conversation. We all have to jump in. So then this begs the question, well, if it's all of ours, well then what's the state of our collective mental health? Truth is, folks, it's not so great. So mental health has been declining in the US over the last 20 years. This alone is unnerving, right? But it's actually something bigger going on here. The truth is that we're a part of a global loneliness epidemic. Now, I know what you're thinking here, like, oh, Kiki, it's just loneliness. Like, literally, we have mass shootings every other day and the polar ice caps are melting. We have far more important things to talk about than loneliness. But the truth is that loneliness is actually really important. It's associated with a vast number of different personal and social issues, everything from Alzheimer's to heart disease to poverty to homelessness. There was a study done just released a few weeks ago, and the results were super interesting. They gave a survey with questions about loneliness to patients that were visiting their primary care physicians. And when they got the results back, super interesting stuff happened. So nearly half of adults felt lonely. That means for every one of us here in this room right now, 1 out of every 2 of us is suffering from loneliness. And if it isn't you, it's the person immediately next to you. Just look at them. Right? Scary, right? That's a lot of people. So it actually, the results go a whole lot deeper than that, too. Turns out that loneliness was most common among patients under the age of 25. This goes against our understanding of mental health and around loneliness because we think that loneliness is only for the elderly. But if we actually look at the statistics from this study, 33% of individuals ages 18 to 24 were lonely, compared to only 11% of adults over age 65. So what this means is that Gen Z is 3 times lonelier than baby boomers. Scary. But if we actually start going deeper into this, we actually learn that suicide rates have gone up 28% since 2000. And the rate is the highest among teen girls. And that rate hit a 40-year high back in 2015. As an auntie to a teen girl, I find this terrifying. We have buried our emotions for so long that we don't even understand what's happening around us. And there's a lot of researchers that are trying to figure this out as well. Because as our mental health has been declining, access to mental health care has actually risen, which means that there are lots of other factors at play here. The experts are trying to figure out what exactly is going on, and they think that there's a couple of things that are factors. Increased violence in the community, increased violence in the home, sexual abuse and sexual violence, bullying, general anxiety, financial stress, social media. So, do any of these things sound familiar to any of you? Because they sure do to me. I see these things every time I read the news. We have buried our emotions for so long that it's become normal. But like a can of soda that's being constantly shaken, all of that anger, sadness, fear, it has to go somewhere. So we end up getting mass shootings every other day and polar ice caps that are melting. It's like we're living in a real-life horror movie loop that's constantly spinning out of control. And our youngest generation is paying the highest price. At this point, I am angry. I am a straight white woman of privilege in the United States, and if my reality around me is a horror movie loop, well then what does that mean for a black woman in Flint, Michigan? Or a refugee in Europe? Or a trans woman literally anywhere in this world? I didn't realize, though, the full gravity of that question until I started doing international relief work. It was in refugee camps in Greece and orphanages in Haiti where I understood fully what happens when people are stripped entirely of their choices and mental health is pushed to the absolute brink. I was surrounded by beautiful women and children that had suffered literally the greatest tragedies that humanity can do to itself. Tremendous loss and sacrifice, pain, true suffering, and it would have been totally fair that those individuals would have just sat down in that pain. But almost immediately following all of that sadness and hurt and anger was this joy, this humor, this curiosity. I was given a sense of generosity and unconditional love that rivals that of my own mother. It was in refugee camps in Greece and orphanages in Haiti where I realized probably one of the most important lessons of my whole life. When we are in the shadows, choice entirely gone, mental health but a hope, none of us want to be alone. So we have to start breaking through the fog of status quo. We have to realize that we need to break through emotional barriers in order to actually bring to life the success that we're capable of. But where do we start? How do you even begin something like that? I believe it's with social support. So social support is actually a psychological term for the people and resources that surround each of us. These resources and people, they help us through different trials and tribulations in our life. So it can be a both a positive thing, it can be a negative thing. It really depends on the situation around you. A strong, thriving social support system is actually super powerful stuff. And again, science backs this up. So yay, science. Strong social support actually boosts oxytocin. That means that it allows our bodies to relax and de-stress, allowing us to look at our issues with greater clarity. It boosts our confidence, so we're able to tackle those challenges with greater strength and vigor. And it also positively reinforces social relationships, creating a strong network and ecosystem of solutions and support. It's truly amazing stuff. So I was invited to lunch by this amazing refugee family. It was an Afghani mom, the exact same age as me, and she had 3 kids, the youngest of which was just under 2 years old and was playing right next to us. This little peanut had obvious physical and developmental disabilities, and her mom was telling me how back home in Afghanistan, there was no access to medical care, so this child had no diagnosis. She knew that if her daughter wanted to have a chance at a real good life, that they needed to get medical care for her. And that meant they needed to leave. So they packed up what they could carry, she strapped her baby to her back, and they started walking. They walked across Afghanistan, they walked across Turkey, they climbed through the mountains of Turkey, sleeping on the sides of dirt paths, fearing that people would jump them in the night. She crossed the Aegean Sea with that baby on her back just to come to a camp, sitting in a tent with me, making me lunch. It was then that it kind of dawned on me that her story sounds an awful lot like that of a woman here in the US. So this mom is working 3 minimum wage jobs just to make rent. She's also struggling to find medical care for her sick kid because of mediocre health insurance and a broken healthcare system. And it dawns on me that if these 2 women could just talk, share their emotions, their experiences, to realize that they weren't alone, that crazy, amazing things could happen. And that if other women could join into that conversation, we could actually start to build kind of solutions and opportunities that would naturally happen because they had that great support system that was being built from those relationships. And I realized then that technology is our ally in all of this. It allows us to create vulnerability and openness over oceans, vast distances. And if we could combine those 2 things, magic would happen. So I founded Just a Girl. Just a Girl is the digital intersection of mental health and women's empowerment globally. We are a safe place for women of all ages, backgrounds, and beliefs to have honest conversations about stuff that really matters. Stuff like loss, like fear, like loneliness, like fearlessness. I believe it's these kinds of conversations that break down our emotional barriers, build a global sisterhood of solutions and support capable of tackling every single challenge that throws at it, because I know that we're stronger together. Now, I know that this is just my way of trying to make mental health a conversation. Just a Girl is my way of putting mental health to the forefront. But the reality is that mental health is a conversation for all of us. I can't be the only girl standing on a stage talking about this stuff. So whether you're a guy trying to figure out how to jump into this evolving gender equality space, or you're an organization looking at building policies and practices that support the best interests of all of your employees, mental health matters. If we don't all jump into this conversation, we're never going to be able to fix these kinds of problems. So I have 3 specific challenges for you. 1, don't bury your emotions. Be brave enough to look yourself in the mirror. 2, find common ground with every single person that you meet. It is from this common ground that we will be able to build that social support system, a thriving social support system, capable of actually creating the kinds of solutions we are capable of. If you want success in your life, common ground is the key. And be vulnerable. It is by cracking your heart open and showing yourself to other people that you're truly able to build the kinds of relationships that are possible. Don't shy away from vulnerability. It's one of the greatest forms of bravery. Now, I know that we're talking about building a better world here. Lord knows I've dedicated my entire life to it at this point. But the truth is that if we want to actually start to build a better world for future generations, if we want to stop mass shootings from happening every other day and stop the polar ice caps from melting, the very first place that we have to start is by saving ourselves. Thank you.